Good morning. It's Tuesday morning, and Garland Nixon here with Laith Marouf. We're going to get an update on what's happening in West Asia. Let's talk. Good morning, everyone, and everyone in the chat, especially Chicken Patty. Chicken Patty's been following us for a long time. So Chicken Patty she's the philosophical heart and soul of this channel. We got Laith Marouf, lots going on, and before we get going, everyone, make sure you go to freepalestine.tv. That's freepalestine.tv.
That
And
video.
oh God, Free Palestine TV. I've screwed it all up. Free Palestine TV .video. That's what it
Without the
is.
TV.
Oh, geez.
It's
No
just
TV.
because the .tv is so expensive because
Oh,
Tuvalu is selling them for tens of thousands of dollars. So
wow.
it's freepalestine.video is the website.
Well, there we go, everybody. So Laith was able to get us straight. Free Palestine .video. That's where you want to go. Laith is doing a lot. They're doing a lot of work out of West Asia, out of the Middle East, and they're doing a lot of English language stuff, English language journalism, so people outside can find out what's happening. Most importantly, when you go to freepalestine.video, make sure that you donate. If you can't afford to donate, even if you can or can't, here's what I need you to do. Share the website, freepalestine.video. Share it on all of your social media platforms and put a note in there for people to donate when they go there. Okay, before we get going, well, now that we've gotten going, let's start here. Number one, and I'm going to go down in the order of things that are on the top of my mind. We're going to get to Rafah and everything, but let's start here. Bahrain is barely a city state. I mean, it has the population of some towns in America, right? What is it, like 300? I mean, is it even a couple hundred, 300,000, 400,000, something like that? I don't think it's very big. At any rate, there is a resistance out of Bahrain now. What do we need to know about that, Laith Marouf?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you mentioned their population, and currently like 300, 400,000. But when the British created Bahrain, it had like a 40,000 population. It's basically a block, one university campus building. That's what it was, its population, and it had a huge oil and gas fields, and that's the reason that the British chopped them off from their Arabic Dept. And of course, Bahrain hosts the largest American Navy base in all of Asia and outside the United States. And to see right now the Bahraini people launching an armed resistance group and firing drones from Bahrain to hit the occupied Palestinian lands. There's not only the American Navy base there, there's just beside it in Qatar, the largest American air base, and just across the water in Dammam in Saudi Arabia is the largest American army base. So within this triangle, above all this distance over Saudi Arabia and Jordan, the Bahraini resistance started its actions with this magnificent attack that showed us that all the presence of American bases there and all the air defenses of the West that they have in Saudi Arabia and Jordan could not stop Bahrain. So this was obviously something that must have shocked all the military cadre of the United States in the region. It must have shocked the elite in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And it shows us that in a situation of a full-out war in the region, even supposedly safe bases of the United States like Bahrain are going to be part of the equation of a wider war.
Wow. Well, I just saw online that Bahrain's population is 1.4 million, right?
But
As an
that
example.
includes all the foreign workers. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. But even if we do that, I live in a county in Maryland, which is a small state. 600,000 people in the county that I live in. Maryland's got 6 million people. So if you add my county and the next county beside it or so, you got pretty much the population of Bahrain, not big. So let me ask you this. What I find interesting is I would think Bahrain, a country with a lot of money, that the people are fairly pampered, that it's one of those states that they get a lot of money off of oil money to keep the people bribed and at bay by giving them stipends from the government, that it's probably not an overly religious, it's more of a bit secular country, et cetera, very aligned with the West. What does it tell us that a country such as Bahrain has a resistance that now is willing to fight? Does it tell us that the resistance is going to, do you think it's going to continue to spread to other countries like this, that there are other people, other groups trying to become part of the resistance? What are your thoughts on the spread of resistance?
Yeah, well, Bahrain is very special because the population is 99% Shia. And the British moved a branch of the Saud family, the Saud ruling family, into Bahrain, a Sunni family, to rule over the indigenous people of Bahrain. And so it's never been a place where the elite that control the money that the United States give them from the oil and gas actually represent their people. No, there's been, since day one of the creation of Bahrain, rebellions, armed resistance. They were crushed hard in the 1970s by the British military, and that continues. Of course, we know that in 2011, the demonstrations began in Bahrain at the same time as the rest of the Arabic world. And the American and Saudi military crushed that rebellion again. Then currently, Bahrain is occupied by the Saudi army. There's Saudi military everywhere, and the bridge into Saudi Arabia is basically occupied by the Saudis. And you can't leave Bahrain if you are a critic of the ruling family. There's hundreds of people, if not thousands, that are been jailed now for the last decade since these demonstrations began. So now we see that because the peaceful demonstrations were crushed, that there is no ability for people to represent themselves or their opinions in their government, that surely people now move to armed resistance. And one thing that we need to think about with this armed resistance is, where did they get their weapons? How did the weapons get into Bahrain? Under the siege of having the biggest American Navy base, you still get weapons into Bahrain of drones, advanced drones that can reach all the way to Palestine. So this is an indicator of a total breach of security apparatuses that the United States has in the country. The fact that this is maybe indicator that things like happen in Saudi Arabia itself, because remember, the whole east coast of Saudi Arabia, where the oil is, are Shia population that are intermarried into the Bahraini population and to the Iraqi population. And these people have also been rebellion for a while. And so this must be, showing bad omens to the future of American presence in the region.
I recall when the Ansar Allah was able to strike some of the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, in the Shia areas. The Saudis were very concerned that the Shia population was involved in assistance with targeting, that it appeared maybe some of the, explosions there were indigenous, et cetera, that the Saudis already have a concern that the Shia population is restive, shall we say. When I look at what's going on now, if I'm leaders that have been propped up by the British and the US, whether it's in Bahrain or Jordan, etc., I have to be extremely concerned that if there is a broader war and the region becomes, gets out of control, they're going to be the first to go. I would have to have that concern that I'd be that once things went out of control, that I'd be the first to go.
Oh yes, oh yes. None of these quote unquote royal families would exist today if in the 1950s, during the Arabic revolutions in much of the region, if these royal families were not protected directly by the British and the Americans. There was rebellions in Saudi occupied Arabia in the 70s, rebellions in Oman, rebellions in Bahrain, and all of them were crushed. Thousands and thousands of people died, to try to get sovereignty and independence from the British and the Americans, and unfortunately it didn't succeed. But now we have a new generation. The wealth of the 1980s that may have kept people at bay because there is some spending is gone. In Bahrain now, for each Bahraini, there's 4 or 5 foreign workers. It's similarly in Qatar. In Emirates, it's even worse. It's like almost 10 foreign workers for every local. So the locals themselves, number one, have lost all the wealth that they could have gotten from the oil boom. They're not receiving those subsidies anymore. And they're feeling currently as a minority in their own country, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in the Emirates. And this is starting an underground, as we see in Bahrain and other places, rebellion that could boil out any moment, especially if the American presence starts weakening, and their ability of the United States to put out fires in all of this region becomes unattainable. So as this regional war becomes closer and closer, we should be expecting surprises like happened in Bahrain, but in Saudi Arabia or Oman or the Emirates. And of course, Yemen and the Iraqi resistance, if those rebellions break out in those countries, will not be far behind with their support.
There were some rumors also that the U.S., these rumors were out that the U.S. and England were going to launch a massive attack on Yemen. They were going to invade Yemen with troops, etc. I'll be quite frank. I didn't think anything of that. I didn't believe it for 1 second. I didn't believe that the U.S. would do that. And number one, I don't think they have the military wherewithal right now. I don't think they could afford the possibility of losing that one, which may be likely because the the people of Yemen, Ansar Allah, is going to welcome a fight with the U.S. And getting bogged down. If they get in that fight in Yemen, which they were bogged down in Yemen before, how are they going to get out? Another humiliating defeat. But I don't know what you think. I'm sure you heard the rumors. What are your thoughts?
I think it is part of this propaganda campaign over the last week that we heard, unfortunately fed to some sources that are supposed to be progressive or pro, anti-imperialist, like the story with Pepo Escobar and the F-35 trying to nuke Iran. I think the same background of whoever fed this story to Pepo Escobar in order to, generate a little bit more fear of the Israelis, because the Israelis have depended for decades on the misconception in Arabic mind that they are undefeatable, that they're crazies and will kill all your family and so on, and that you can't defeat them. And that has reputation is now gone. So the Israelis are trying to regain some of this deterrence through psychological terror. Okay, and so I believe this story being spread about America planning to invade Yemen is part of that same psychological warfare, and it has no grounds in the truth. Just within 24 hours of that story coming out, the Yemeni government announced that it caught and dismantled a web of agents for the United States and the Saudi government that were trying to locate the where the drones and the missiles are being fired from on the coastal area or in the mountain regions. So they caught like tens of these spies, and put all their pictures and their information and videos of them on national news over the last 48 hours. So it's clear that even if the United States was attempting to locate these where the drones and missiles are fired from, it has failed. So there's no way for it to invade. And of course, I would say anyone that thinks about occupying Yemen now is clearly a supremacist. Why? Because history tells us there has never been one nation that was able to invade Yemen and go up the mountains and occupy Sana'a. This is not the Romans, not the Babylonians, not the Persians, not the Abyssinians, not the Ottomans, not the British. So, and of course, we had almost 12 years of war where the Saudis and the Emiratis, with all the might of the West, the British and the Americans and the Israelis behind them, couldn't occupy North Yemen and the mountain regions of Yemen. So anybody that wants to claim that they can occupy it is because they have not read history, or they've read history but they think that they are above the history of humanity, above geography, above God's will, almost, right? And that's an indicator of supremacy and loss of touch with reality.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to next the big story. Again, we're going to get to Rafa. Before we do that, I want to hit a couple things because that's the big story. I understand there's been more Hezbollah attacks, more drone attacks, and etc. on occupied Palestine. What's the latest? I understand it even as early as this morning.
Oh yes, this morning there was two complex attacks by Hezbollah as the Israelis were invading Rafah. Two complex attacks that included waves of decoy drones, waves of missiles, and waves of suicide drones, all on two different targets. One in the north occupied Palestine, the Galilee Finger or the Galilee Panhandle, and the other on the Golan Heights. And in these two situations, we saw a complete failure of the Israeli air defenses, and the suicide drones hitting their targets tremendously. And of course, there was another thing, is that within an hour or two of that coordinated waves of attacks on northern occupied Palestine, and the Israeli soldiers coming back to their base that was attacked, they also got clobbered the minute they entered their base, and now we know that there's multiple casualties and injuries within the forces in this space. And this comes after 4 or 5 days of these very similar massive attacks that Hezbollah has been conducting, and it's in response to Israel using F-15s to bombard villages on the border of Lebanon and Palestine. 2 days ago, for instance, Hezbollah responded with the largest wave of missiles up until now in this war, close to 100 missiles hitting Kiryat Shmona colony in the Galilee Panhandle, and tens of colonist homes destroyed, and all on video. So we see an increase, again, once more, of the level of intensity of this battle on the north of Palestine. And if we can take lessons from it in a situation of a full-out war, I think Israel will have a hard time defending this territory from invasion by Hezbollah.
The fact that the Israelis were, left the base after the base was struck, as soon as they returned, they were hit again, tells us that there's real-time surveillance. I don't know whether it's drones, could be people on the ground, could be some form of satellite surveillance. But the fact that they came in, that has to be really horrifying to the Israelis, because these are not just blind attacks hoping for whatever. These are actually people who are watching things in real time. And,
Yes, yes, and I think we don't know what weapons Hezbollah is using, what kind of drones they're using to do this 24-hour surveillance off the grounds in North Palestine. But at the same time, we keep on hearing the Israeli military announce waves of drones coming, and they are, all these sirens blaring in the north of Palestine, but nobody can see anything. Okay, so it's clear that somehow Hezbollah is using very small drones, firing hundreds of them at the same time. They're looking like swarms of birds, actually. Okay, and they are, just going in tens of kilometers in and just nonstop. They're sending you. You don't even control them. They're just going onto a one-way mission and doing sweeps, camera sweeps of all of these areas constantly. And Hezbollah is receiving moment-to-moment information of what's happening on the ground, and this is driving the Israeli crazy, because you can't shoot these tiny drones with your air defenses. You can't even see them. They're passing between the birds, and so it's very advanced strategies that Hezbollah is doing, and I think they're showing us things that we haven't seen in any other battle zone yet. And we will know about these secrets once this battle is ended or concluded.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, they've got to be afraid. The U.S. Likewise, because the U.S. has bases all over all over West Asia, and what I think would be obvious to me is this: they are not engaged in a full-out war. That right now Hezbollah is punching, but they're pulling their punches. They're not full out 100% war, which also means this. It means that there's other technology. They're not going to use the best, as they don't need to use it just yet. That also would have to, if I'm the imperialist, I'd have to be concerned that, man, they've got a lot of missiles, drone technology, all of these things, in the same way that when Israel did its probing attack, that it used old drones and stuff that it had laying around, threw a couple good missiles, but the main thing was, I want to see what you have. I'm not going to let you see what I have if I really need to fight you. And I would have to be concerned, if I were the imperialist, that, that was the issue, that I was going to have to face significantly more, and God only knows what it's going to be.
Oh yes, oh yes. And just a few days ago with Free Palestine TV, we went to Hezbollah's new war museum, and it was open just a few weeks before October 7th. And I was personally shocked to see the weapons that are there, including the latest Russian tanks, T-72s and T-90s, and they were all in display. And also there was a whole section of displays of drones, old drones, nothing that we have, nothing new that has not been revealed yet. But some of these drones that were there were used in this war already successfully, including a week and a half ago in Hezbollah's attack on Arab al-Aramsha village in the north of the Galilee. This is a Palestinian village of citizens of Israel that are Palestinian. It's one of the few villages that are still, the residents are still there because they're Palestinians. They're not scared. All the other colonies around them have been evacuated. The colonists ran away. And the Israeli army is having a hard time hide in these empty colonies because their movements are easy to see. So they decided to go and hide in the Palestinian village of Arab al-Aramsha and occupy the community center in the middle of this town. And somehow Hezbollah has, of course, monitored their movement with drones and saw the minute that the brigadier generals and the commanders of the battalion were arriving. They filmed it as they're arriving. And, you know, at the community center at the top of it, there's this glass pyramid. The Israeli military had covered it with tarp. And you see the video from this drone is called Ababil 1. It's like a 10-year-old drone coming down and going through the glass opening between the tarp. And so that showed you, number one, that even these old Hezbollah has that is displaying them in this museum are capable of hitting Israeli targets. And you know what we know that you know the things that we don't even know that they have that will be displayed in later wars, and or if the battle opens up fully, we will be seeing are even more deadly and more accurate in their targeting.
Let's talk about the Rafah crossing. I mean, the Rafah attack. What's going on with that? Where do you think that leads? I think that leads to an expansion of the conflict. But at any rate, your thoughts on what you know so far about it and what do you think is going to happen?
You know, last night, you know, everybody was getting hyped at the announcement that Hamas accepted the ceasefire deal that the Turks and the Americans put forward. And I stayed quiet because I personally wasn't sure that there will be any ceasefire. I'm still don't think this war is going to end anytime soon. But if you remember when this war started, I always talked about the quagmire that Hamas and the resistance put the Americans and the Israelis in. That the Israelis and the Americans have two choices. One is to accept defeat and do a full exchange of prisoners of war, and the other is to continue into a genocidal zero-sum war. And that at every moment and every stage of this war, the Israelis could still choose number one. So I'm not, I don't know if the Israelis are going to still choose number one anytime soon. I'm not sure if this attack on Rafah and the Rafa Crossing are all to, you know, maybe give Netanyahu some cred with the ultra-right fascists like Smotrich and Ben Gvir before he accepts the deal. Not sure of that. But I would say it's still more likely, in my mind, that the Israelis will continue in this genocidal war because the minute this war stops, they will be held to pay for Netanyahu inside Israel. They'll be held to pay in the United States in the elections that's coming for Biden. So there is more impetus for Netanyahu and even Biden himself to continue this war, even though that it's going to destroy their countries, because they're afraid of the results of stopping this war.
I think one of the big things about this is after this conflict, you know, so much has gotten out about the terrible things that Israel has been involved in. I think there's a horror now that when this thing eventually ends, because no war lasts forever, the stories and the pictures that come out will be even worse. That the evidence that will come forward, the stories that will come forward, the videos that will come forward will be unimpeachable. You know, there'll be video of, you know, all kinds of terrible things. There'll be books written, there'll be documentaries made. The evidence of the horrors that will come out will be so overwhelming, it will be impossible to deny any of it and the brutality of any of it. And I think there's also a horror that they've got a tiger by the tail, as they say. They can't hold on and they can't let go.
Yes, and I mean, look, the evidence is already there. Everybody in the world saw, and I think the West, by standing with this genocidal colony throughout, have now set themselves for their own collapse. For the most part, the West has, had a hold over humanity because of its soft power, the propaganda, the talk of rights, and so on. Other than, of course, killing people at mass when they don't believe in your propaganda. But in general, right now, the West has lost all soft power it has, and there's no going back from this. It's going to take another generation for people to forget this massacre if it stops. Look at what's happening in the streets of New York right now with the Met Gala, the demonstrations. I couldn't believe what's happening. Look at what's happening in Switzerland, in the Luzon University. They're beating the hell out of the students in Switzerland. Look at what's happening in the Netherlands. Yesterday, masked thugs, attacked the encampment of students at the university in Amsterdam. And police, just like happened in UCLA, but this time it's fully masked, thugs coming in, beating the hell out of the children, the youth. And then the next morning, the police come and act exactly the same way, rush the crowd and beat them the same way. You'd think almost that the police had put on these baklava masks, these ski masks the night before, and beat up the students and came back in their uniform the next day to continue the beating. So we're getting into this situation where a whole generation of children in the West and youth in the West have been kind of excluded from society. And this is a very dangerous situation for any country, that to lose your youth completely, and the educated class. This is an indicator of decline of the state in all of these countries. And I think the more this war continues in Palestine, the wider the chasm is going to be between these students and racialized groups and anti-war people and artists and from their upper class, their financiers, their elite. And that's something that it's very hard for a state to recover from that.
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing here now is the truth about the empire that people like us have been talking about for long, that we understand imperialism and history. And we've been saying, look, these people are just brutal monsters. And the youth, the young people thought, well, they're going to go to college, they're going to get an education, they're going to be part of the privileged class, they're going to receive the imperial bribes that they receive to go along with the system, that all they have to do is play the game, go to college, all will be well, right? And when they see what's happening in Gaza, they say, wait a minute, this has gone too far. And they thought that they were the privileged children of the system, that they were the next generation, and that they could go out and that they could do whatever they wanted to do, and they could protest and they'd be fine. And now what they're finding out, the reality that we tried to tell them about the system, it's a brutal monster. And if you push back, you think you have rights. You think you have First Amendment rights. And yeah, sure, you got them until you exercise them against the system. And that's when the system will come out and reveal its face. And that's the system will say, remember what we did to the Iraqis, the Syrians, the Libyans, and on and on and on, the Afghans. When we beat them, we killed them, we slaughtered them, we treated them like animals. Yeah, we'll do the same to you. That's who we are. These kids have forced the monsters, the imperialists, they've smoked them out, shall we say. They've forced them to stick their head out and to show themselves for the monsters that they are. And now that these kids know that, they can't put that genie in the bottle. They can't, after this, say, okay, well, kids, back to school so we can continue to teach you to go around the world and steal everybody's stuff. That ain't going to work anymore.
Yes, and look at what happened over the last 15 years. First, the elite in the West lost the right, okay, because people in the right want to have the ability to have wealth and have safety and have all of that at the expense of others outside their borders. meaning look at the American Revolution. I know our listeners here maybe are gonna be angry at me for saying this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. The American Revolution, the myth is that it was because the American populace wanted to have representation in the parliament in the UK. But in reality, the revolution was not about that. The revolution was about King George's proclamation, when King George proclaimed that the 13 colonies, the original 13 colonies, cannot expand westward, cannot colonize or steal indigenous land, because he signed a treaty with the indigenous people who fought on the side of the United Kingdom against the French, and therefore the UK won the war in there. So because King George acknowledged the humanity of indigenous people and made it illegal to loot their resources and lands, the American colonists rebelled against him, because their only way to enrich themselves through being bandits, pirates, looters, rapists, and killers. And what we had 15 years ago, in the beginning of the collapse of American hegemony, military might, is the inability of the United States to continue looting the resources of other nations to enrich its own population. And so we saw this beginning of these rebellions again in the right, because the United States was not giving them what they were promised. And now, not only is the right in rebellion, we now see the left in rebellion, because the left is like, well, you know, we need to end the genocides, we need to end the wars, and look after our own self here. And so now the elite are losing both sides of their own population. The young, the old, the right, the left, the white, the not. Everybody is in rebellion, because those who want to kill and loot cannot, under the circumstances, the United States with its weapons cannot provide them this ability anymore. And those who want to be equals to others and live in peace are not being given that either. And this is happening all across Europe and the West. And this is, I think, even more dangerous situation for these elites and these regimes than it is, for instance, somebody in the Arabic world during this quote-unquote Arabic Spring, or the Hong Kong demonstrations, or what have you. Because that's only one segment of society that has had disillusionment with its elites and regime. Now it's practically the majority of Americans, the majority of Europeans, no matter what political position they take, no matter what color they are or what cultural background they come from, they're all disillusioned with the system. And that is the moment of collapse that we are in the midst of.
I think you're correct. Also, here's a good, interesting story I'd like to get your thoughts on. Republican U.S. senators sent threatening letter to the International Criminal Court prosecutor over possible Netanyahu arrest. I've got the letter right here. I'll read a little bit of it. We write regarding the reports that the ICC may be considering issuing international arrest warrants against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli officials. Such actions are illegitimate and lack legal basis. Now, it's up to a court. You're going to call a court. That's like the court charges me with something. I send a letter to the judge. That's illegitimate and lacks legal basis, to which the judge is going to say, yeah, I think it's the job of the court to determine that, not you. Also, and if carried out, will result in severe sanctions against you and your institutions. They end up by saying the United States will not tolerate politicized attacks by the ICC on our allies. What's interesting is the International Criminal Court is used to go against African leaders. It was used to go against Serbian leaders. It's used to go against President Putin. However, what they say is, we won't tolerate it on politicized attacks by the ICC on our allies. Target Israel and we will target you. If you move forward with the measures indicated in the report, we will move to end all American support for the ICC, sanction your employees and associates, and bar you and your families from the United States. You have been warned. That sounds like the kind of country that would commit a genocide. I mean, if you commit a genocide, threatening the courts is only like the mafia. You know what I mean? Oh, well, okay. If you're anybody against us, we'll kill you. We'll threaten you. We'll attack you. That sounds exactly. Some people are like, oh, that's shocking. I'm like, shocking. That sounds exactly what a country who would commit a genocide would say.
Oh, yes. I mean, everybody knows the ICC was only made for the Slavs and the slaves. Okay, this is this is the only people that are supposed to be brought in front of the ICC, and now we know. Okay, so if you didn't know, now you know. And the other thing is that look at it, the threats now are coming to the United Nations as a whole. The United States is threatening to cut all funding to all UN agencies if the United Nations General Assembly votes to accept Palestine as a full member state. I mean, so I said this before on this show, where we're witnessing a moment where the empire of the United States, all its components, are rejecting international law and all the international structures that were created after World War II to govern this world into a more peaceful, less war situation. And this is very reminiscent of the Italians, the Germans, and the Japanese walking out of the League of Nations. And so why? Because both of the Italians, the Germans, and the Japanese wanted to colonize, and the League of Nations said there's no more colonialism. Okay, and today we see the United Nations and all these structures and laws that were created after World War II saying to the US and Israel, you cannot genocide to the West. And the West saying, no, we want to continue genociding. Okay, and this is where we are. We're at this moment of a possibility of collapse of all of these structures. The United States was trying to even create alternative structures by force, what they called the
rules-based international,
rules-based order. So it is important for us to look at history so we can predict what's going to happen and understand these things as they're happening. And the United States is now a lawless rogue state that is protecting the premier genocider on this planet, the Zionist colony, and the West is destroying even its own internal rules and regulations. They're not only attacking ICC, as you're seeing, they're attacking the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment of the United States. These are all being ripped apart in front of us, and it is the elite in the United States that's leading this charge.
Here's something interesting. They say, finally, neither Israel nor the United States are members of the ICC and therefore outside of your organization's supposed jurisdiction. That's interesting. When they want to be, they're in. But let me find it. If you issue a warrant for the arrest of the Israeli leadership, we will interpret this not only as a threat to Israel's sovereignty, but to the sovereignty of the United States. They're being honest here. They're being honest because what they're saying is this: we don't really consider Israel a country. Israel is a U.S. military base. It's a U.S. Colony. It's a U.S. Extension. It's not a sovereign country. So they're being honest, saying if you go after, basically what they're saying is we consider anyone who charges Israel with a crime to be charging an American with a crime. They're being honest because Israel is viewed as part of America. If you look at everything that has happened, Israel doesn't even have a military. Israel has a brutal police force. They can go into the occupied territories and beat the hell out of civilians and children. They can do that. But when it comes to a war, they get their asses kicked every single time. When they go against people who are true warriors, who are defending themselves, they're going to lose. So the U.S. then comes in, defends them against Iran, defends them against whoever, because here's what I say, there isn't anything called Israel. It is an extension of the U.S. And here they're being honest, saying you can't charge people in the U.S. The whole thing, I think, is honesty. As brutal and vicious as it sounds, it is honesty about how they really view the world, how they view the international order, and how they view Israel.
Yeah, and it's getting more and more exposed. Some people, think that there is some independence between these components of the empire: Israel, the United States, the EU, the UK, France. I mean, look at what Macron did just yesterday when President of China was visiting. He went and got the EU president,
Von der Leyen.
Yes, to sit on the meeting. So, the Chinese were not there to meet the EU. They were there to meet France. So what we see is right now, all these things becoming more clear for anybody that had doubts or didn't know the machinations of how the empire works. The United States will defend Israel because it is an extension of its imperial holdings. It is actually one of the crown jewels of its imperial holdings. Yesterday, the shitty Prime Minister of Canada, Trudeau, on the Holocaust Memorial Day, gave a speech, and he said that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, that they will defend anyone's right to be Zionist, and so this is, now you have governments in the West, including the U.S. government, which passed that anti-Semitism act a few weeks ago, clearly stating that they're not anymore secular states. Okay, that actually they are theocracies, and the official religion, it's not Judaism, it's not Christianity, it is Zionism. Okay, and so right now you have a theocracy all over the West. Zionism is the official religion. Anyone, even if they're Jewish or Christian, that opposes Zionism will be beaten and jailed. And this is now in the open. Finally, for decades I've been saying the West has official religion and is Zionism. Now it's impossible to deny that reality.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Last but not least, your thoughts of the empire is so desperate. Let me get your thoughts on Ukraine. What happened recently was, the Europeans are like, well, we might have to send some troops, and the Americans, NATO, they're practicing on Russia's border. And kind of flex it a little bit, and the Russians responded by doing tactical nuclear exercises, and basically said, look, you guys, basically you guys mess around, and if you come into Ukraine, it's on. And it appears to me for now that the NATO, the Europeans have backed down. I would say this. People are, for those who say, yes, I think the Americans are going to send troops in. They don't understand the Americans. They use cannon fodder. They'll say to the French, hey, send some guys in there. Then they'll get slaughtered. Poland, hey, you got some extra Poles. We're running out of Ukrainians, right? How we fix for Poles? We got plenty of Poles. Throw them in till we run out of Poles. Then we'll go. These poor suckers will get thrown into the meat grinder, just like the Ukrainians, bit by bit. Americans ain't sending no soldiers there. That's what these suckers are for. That's what cannon fodder is for, to be thrown in front of a cannon. It is, to me, the saddest, sorriest group that this earth has ever seen is the so-called leadership of the Europeans, because they are just, they threw their economy into the trash bin at the behest of these idiots in DC, and now they're just on the verge of throwing their soldiers, 10, 20, 30,000. And how long will that last on the Russian border? They'll be torn to pieces in hours. So your thoughts on Macron and the EU threatening to go to the Russian border? When has that ever worked out well for France or Germany?
You know, there was talk about sending French troops, as you said, and in fact, there was a video I saw yesterday of dead soldiers, and they had the French flags on their back. They were wearing Ukrainian fatigues, but they had French badges on them. So maybe they're already on the ground. And remember, this is the foreign legion of France. So that means that these are non-French citizens that have a path to citizenship, okay, if they serve France. And today, Lukashenko and Russia, Belarus and Russia announced that they are preparing, testing all their nukes, their non-ballistic missiles that carry nukes. So this is an indicator, of course, of what Russia and Belarus are ready for, or getting ready for in such a situation. The head of Chechnya, what's his name? General, I
Oh
forgot his
yeah,
name.
Ramzan Kadyrov.
Yes, Kadyrov was talking
Yes.
today to the media and said that that Russia and the Chechen troops should take Odessa and Kharkov, meaning take the whole coast line that's left for Ukraine, and that's probable that it's going to happen. Of course, you look at how the West is acting in Ukraine, you look at how they're acting in Palestine and how they're acting around China, and you're like, okay, this is all crazy. Obviously, you can't do all of this all at once. You can't even beat Hamas after 6-7 months now. How are you going to beat the Russians? And the battle over this battlefield of Ukraine historically has been the deathbed of European empires. Okay, we saw Napoleon try this. We saw Hitler try this. We saw before Napoleon, the Germans in the 1100s and the Crusades into Slavic lands being stopped halfway through Ukraine. So historically, it's been impossible. Again, geography and history should teach people in positions of power about how to make these take these decisions. But if you are a supremacist, if you think that you're the end of history, if you think that you're chosen people, history and geography will not teach you anything, and in fact, you will want to prove that you are above history and geography and the course of them. And this is where the hubris of people like Napoleon or Hitler led them to their defeat, and as we see, is leading to the defeat of the Zionists and the American empire in the battlefield of Ukraine.
What, last thing, one of the stories I always like to touch on Africa, really big things going on in Africa, and that is basically in Niger. There's a base, and basically the government of Niger is telling the U.S., you got to get out of here. The U.S. hasn't left, so they invited the Russians in, and there's like a military base, and they literally put the Russians in one part of the base, the Americans are in the other, and they're saying, Russians, you have to get out of here. We're seeing country after country now in Africa signing military agreements and security agreements with Russia. People, I think, are starting to realize that Russia is a very, very militarily powerful country. And they, are also recognizing this. The U.S. says we're there to fight extremism and ISIS. The U.S. creates ISIS and then says we're there to fight ISIS. When the Russians come in, they want to clear things out, and Russia and China can make deals. I'll put it like this. There are people that are criticizing Russia or China in Africa. Bottom line is, Africa has a lot of resources, and they have a right to choose who they want to do business with. And I think it's another sign of imperialism and supremacy for the U.S. to say, those guys or these guys or those guys over there, they're going to do you wrong. You shouldn't do business with them, as opposed to the way I see it. Look, if it works out for them, if it doesn't work out for them, I believe that the Africans are plenty wise enough to make the choices that are in their best interest. But your thoughts on what's happening in particularly like the Sahel region and the rapid ejection of French and U.S. imperialism in Africa?
Yeah, and just now Mali proposed a federation, okay, between Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and they're opening it to anyone that wants to join. So imagine you having a federation in the Sahel region. Chad probably will fall into that, maybe Mauritania, but
Senegal
also,
eventually.
yes,
Senegal's got a new
and
president who's pro movie looking towards the east.
yes, and at the same time, Algeria has been talking to both Tunis and Libya to create their own confederation. And Libya, of course, being occupied by the Emiratis, the Italians, the French, the Saudis, have walked out of this talk. But now we're seeing that Tunis could merge with Algeria. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, and Chad, maybe Senegal, as you mentioned, could all merge. And this is what scares the West, that actually these nations could break the colonial borders that were purposefully drawn at the end of World War I to make it impossible for these countries to consolidate their resources, to consolidate their populations, to become normal, productive nations, because these borders are done in ways that cut peoples on both sides of the borders, cut resources in ways that make very small countries like Bahrain have all the resources, while a country like a big country doesn't have anything. This is the way it's been designed. And the only way forward for peoples in Africa, Latin America, and Asia to guarantee sovereignty and never to fall back under colonialism again is to erase these colonial borders and redraw them around their natural, cultural, and linguistic border lines. And this is where the world is moving. And the more, by the way, the United States is busy in Palestine and busy in Ukraine and busy in China, the more people in Africa and Latin America will have a chance to escape this colonialism and to put forward new visions for their future.
I always bring this up. I used to work somewhere and it was a very oppressive atmosphere. But the people who ran it knew how far to go. You know what I mean? They knew how far to stick their necks out with the employees. They treated employees like crap, but they would only go but so far. So it went on for many years. And some new leaders, a new leadership came in, and they were like, the Blinken, they were pretty fascist dudes, and they went over the line, and the whole thing blew up and fell apart and were redone. Sometimes I think, which led me to believe this, in a paradoxical way, the Biden, Blinken, Netanyahu, people like this, if we all survive this, which I have faith that we will, I tend to be an optimist, and I believe that we'll survive it. If we don't, it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? But I believe that we will. That it's the same dynamic, that when people come in and they try to take it all and push hard, and they're like, now we're going to take everything, we're going to own everything, we're going to put everybody down, the whole world is ours, right? And people are going to do what we say, everybody, and we'll crush anybody who doesn't, blah, blah, blah. They create an environment where they end it all. That's what ends it all. The people who come in and try to just crush everything and take everything at one time. That's the experience that I've had. They take it too far. That the people who know how to manage and manipulate imperialism and things, they can take it and they keep their puppets in line and all that kind of stuff. But when these fascists come in, they don't know that sometimes you use the iron fist and sometimes you use the velvet glove, that there are shackles of iron and shackles of gold, that you got to play one against the other. With them, it's iron fist and shackles of iron. And that is what brings them down. What do you think about that, Laith?
Yeah, I mean, like the collapse of the Soviet Union got really in the head of the elite in the West. You remember they wrote books like The End of History and
Right.
The Clash of Civilization and so on. They really believed that that's it. and we're the end of history, we're the top of humanity, all of this, and they went buck wild crazy, from 1990 until now. How many
Especially after
nations?
2000, when Bush gets after 2000, the last 20 years, this so-called, remember 2000, they had a list of 7 countries, all in the Middle East and Africa, that they were going to overthrow, right? That was, we're going to take it all now. Now that
Yes,
the Soviet Union is gone, the whole world is ours. We're taking it all. And that's when you blow.
yes, yes, imperial overreach or overstretch, whatever you want to call it, and they, the problem with that they had, I think, the elite in the West while they're doing this, is that they didn't have anyone that within their own structures that was criticizing them or giving them pointers of like, okay, guy, you're doing this too much, you're going to have this, and or they purged these people
Yes.
out from all the foreign affairs department, the secretary of state, whatever. They purged everybody out that had any comprehensive logic capability.
Out of colleges. Look at the colleges. They purged them out of colleges. Max, not to interrupt you, I'll make it quick. Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone, they did an article here just the other day. I just interviewed him yesterday, wherein they had a fake professor, shall we say, at Columbia. This person's job was to work with the New York Police Department and directly with the Israelis in Tel Aviv, with the Mossad, with the Israeli government. So not only did they purge people, they put monitors in the colleges and in the institutions. If they've got those monitors in the colleges, they have them at CNN, at MSNBC, at Fox, at the Washington Post, you know what I mean? On and on and on. So basically, they purge them and they actually put complicity monitors in to ensure that everybody sings the same song.
Oh, yes. And add to that, there used to be some divergent voices in the mainstream media or challenges between these media on positionality. But as we saw between 1990 and now, it got homogenized. All the media, it became an echo chamber. And there's nobody that's breaking the line or saying something that is not repetitive. So it's an echo chamber within this elite. They're blinded. They have these horse blinders on, and there's no way out for them from this except by admitting defeat. And they don't want to admit defeat. They don't want to share power. So many nations destroyed on this planet since 1991, and the only way to end it, it seems like, is for an internal combustion in these implosion in these states, and or full out military defeat, like in the situation of the Zionist colony.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree that ultimately what takes down imperialism is internal uprising, revolution. And that's what the dynamics that they're creating now, not just what they're doing externally, not just the genocide, that's part of it. But the other part of it is the economic pain. American, one of the things I was reading this, and we'll end up with this. I was reading an article yesterday that like a huge percentage of Black voters said, we're not voting for Biden. We're staying home. They and these are mostly, and the Black voters in America, mostly going to be working class, working poor, right? They've created, and when they asked them why, the first thing they talked about was prices. My life is more difficult. It's harder to feed my families, etc. Right? And they even mentioned, well, we've got immigrants coming in, and they got like $80 million or something. Chicago, $50 million to go to immigrants. Nothing for poor communities like mine. They also mentioned all this money going overseas. They specifically mentioned, this was in the Washington Post. I shared the article, specifically mentioned the money going to Israel. And here my community gets nothing. Things are getting worse. So the other part of this is people at home. And I think it starts with the Black community. It starts with the students, young people were crushed during COVID, right? It starts with the communities that tend to have less, that tend to get hit harder by these, economic issues. But there's a revolt going on here, and it's going to really show itself. I'll put it like this. I am looking forward to this convention. I think they're going to have to say we're afraid of COVID or something, so we're going to do a remote convention. I don't think they could do it in Chicago, because I don't think there's enough room in Chicago to hold all of the protesters. They'll tear that place to shreds.
Oh yeah, look, the things that we talk about in the West about immigrant communities, migrant workers, the pressures on the working class in general, and so on. Here in Lebanon, we lived how the West, the elite, play these things. But you have to recognize that the capitalist class in the United States, just like the capitalist class here in Lebanon, need these migrant workers. Here is the Palestinian refugee or the Syrian refugee. The capitalist class wants to hire them for cheap, and they need them to come into the country. They don't want to hire the Lebanese worker because he will belong to a union or knows his rights or asks for the basic services that he should be receiving, he or she. And this plays two things. On the one hand, they allow this, the Syrian refugees here, every month we hear the elite talk about, oh, the Syrian refugees are destroying our economy, and then every month the Syrian government says, give us back our refugees, or the UN comes, or the EU comes, and then suddenly the Lebanese government doesn't want to let them go. Okay, why? Because the economy will collapse, or they will have to hire the Lebanese worker at the wage that it should be paid. Okay. Similarly, in the United States, I keep on hearing about all these waves of migrants coming to the U.S. The elite in the U.S.,
yes.
The capitalist elite, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they want these waves of Mexican and Central American workers to come so they can pay them cheaply, and at the same time rouse up the hate of the working class in the United States. Instead of rising up against the capitalist class, the owners of the companies, the politicians, to get them to pay them correctly, they will be rising up in hate against these migrant workers. So this is something very important for us as working class to recognize, that the elite are the ones that are creating these conditions, and they're benefiting from both. They're benefiting from this poor migrant that had to walk thousands of kilometers to get to the border of the US and still get shitty conditions of work when he gets there. And they're benefiting from the anger of the working class, of their own population, and the destabilization that causes.
Yeah, and ultimately, what do you always get? You always get the ruling elite who set up a situation, and they say, and we'll save you from it. What does Trump say? I'm going to get rid of 40 million immigrants. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to throw them all out. We all know that people like Trump and Biden and all, their grass is cut, their cars are washed, their house is cleaned by immigrants. Every time you turn around, they're finding out another one who has undocumented immigrants that they're paying to do stuff, right? So the bottom line is that we're looking at an environment where by their actions, they destabilize Guatemala or El Salvador, right? So they can rob Guatemala and El Salvador of their bananas and their coffee and all of this stuff, whatever else they have. In destabilizing it, then Guatemalans and El Salvadorans show up at the border. They then use them to drive the prices, the costs down. A lot of people will argue about Black people in the United States. Why are Black folks, or why are they got issues with immigrants? They see it as a labor issue. It's not the immigrants that they're mad at. It's a labor issue. They understand you're driving down the cost of labor. It's going to hurt me. But the Klan is, instead of saying, hey, why are you destabilizing those countries and creating all of these immigration problems and driving down the cost of labor? Trump or whoever, whatever faction of the ruling elite comes along and says, look at those immigrants coming over here. They're committing crimes. They're doing terrible things. And you know what they're doing? They're costing you their job. I, a member of the ruling elite, various factions of the ruling elites, we're the ones that are save you. So it ends up with a paradox where the people who create the problem, the people who give you an enemy that ain't them, then convinces you they're the only ones that can save you. It's sad to see that people are such suckers that they can see that their enslavers and their oppressors are their salvation.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and it's what's funny is that El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, each of these countries has a million maybe population. You know, so the United States, if it really wanted to end, not only do they need to stop interfering, the US government can build these countries in 2 seconds, make them like heavens, and those people would not leave. And it's so small, the population. Okay.
Yes.
But no, it is more beneficial to force these Hondurans, El Salvadorians to leave forcefully because their country, to empty it so they can extract the resources for zero money from these countries, and have these cheap migrants come and take the jobs away from the American worker who demands his rightful pay. And therefore, you know, it works in so many ways for this elite. This scheme of the emptying small nations that have resources of their populations, that make migrant workers at the whim of the market and the winds of which war and what border, and to disempower the working class of their own country in the United States and or Europe.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what we're seeing now is a lot of people waking up. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, where people start to wake up and understand what's happening. And I think that's a very positive thing. All right, Laith. Lastly, and most importantly, Laith has a project that he works on called freepalestine.video. That's the website, freepalestine.video. Please, everyone, I'll ask you to do this. Number one, go to freepalestine.video, and if you can afford it, then donate to freepalestine.video. Keep them. It's English language work coming out of Beirut. Number one. Number two, if you can't, which is fine, a lot of people can't right now, but you could still contribute. Here's what I want you to do: go to freepalestine.video, share that website on all of your social media, Telegram, X, you name it, all of your social media outlets, and make a little note for people, just like I'm doing here. Hey, everyone, please donate. Keep this work going. It's important to help what's help the good causes that are fighting against genocide. Thanks very much, Laith. And any other place where people find you? Or are you on X? Are you on anything, Telegram, anything else?
Yes, we're on X. It's TV Free Palestine. We're on Telegram. It's Free Palestine TV. We're on Instagram, Free Palestine TV. We're on Buy Me a Coffee. We're on Rumble, Free Palestine TV, and we're doing these reports from the front. Every 2 days, we're releasing a report. You can watch that report from the Hezbollah War Museum on our Twitter.
Oh, wow.
And our Rumble. And we are doing these interviews in a casual setting with some of the biggest thinkers and politicians in the region. Upcoming right now, we're preparing for it, is an interview of the former spokesperson of Hezbollah, who is a current member of parliament here in Lebanon. He's never been interviewed in English before. So you will get access to the thoughts of people and the leaders here, and you will get access to the on-the-ground action on the border. Please help us by donating. We're all volunteers, but it still costs us all the technical, to cover all the expenses.
freepalestine.video. That's the website. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, smash the like button. You see everything scrolling across the bottom. If you can help this channel, great. Also, make sure that you share this particular video on all your social media platforms. Thanks. We're out.